So there's a parable from Robert Bly, and it goes something like this, that is, we're children, we come into the world whole, complete, luminous beings as children. And then we start going through the world and living, and authority figures, they start wagging their fingers at us, and they start saying things like, don't do that, don't do that, no, stop, don't do that, don't do that. And as children, we don't hear that as, oh, my behavior is off. We hear that as, I am off, I am bad, I am wrong. And so that part of us that gets its the finger wagged at that part, we take that part of ourselves and we put it behind us and we put it in a bag. And as we continue to grow up, more and more authority figures, not only in our family, start wagging their fingers at us. The culture starts wagging a finger at us. Religion starts wagging its finger at us. Ideologies start wagging their fingers at us. Psychology starts wagging its finger. Buddhism starts wagging its finger. And we just keep putting parts of ourselves behind us in that bag. And by the time we reach midlife, that bag is so big that it stretches around the corner. And, by the time we get to the therapy office, that bag is stretching down the hall and around the street corner, and it's giant and huge. And then, many people at midlife start the arduous process of taking things out of that bag, looking at them, and really questioning, why did I put this in the bag in the first place? Or is there any value to this thing that I put in the bag? And maybe that thing that's back there in the bag, maybe that is the key to my happiness. Maybe that's also the key to why I'm so fucking miserable, is that most of me is in that bag. And maybe it's not about getting a new yacht or a sexy partner or, I don't know, a million Instagram followers. Maybe that's not going to do it. Maybe my growth, my wholeness is about taking things out of that bag and bringing them back into the self, into a cohesive wholeness of unity, what we had back as children, but now as adults. So this is the part two of exploration into the process of projection. And this one, I'm going to look more at projection through the lens of shadow integration, maybe a more Buddhist perspective, as well as applying this to where we project perhaps the most in modern life, and that is in the arena of romantic love. So buckle up, here we go. So that little parable from Robert Bly, that is a description of the Jungian notion of the persona and the shadow. So persona is Latin for the mask. Persona is what our parents rewarded. It's what the society wanted us to be. It's what the culture wanted us to be. Or it's a reaction against what the culture wanted us to be or our parents wanted us to be. That is still the persona. If you're doing the opposite of what your parents want you to be, you're still in their paradigm, and that is still part of the persona. The shadow is everything that was rejected, everything that was the finger wagged at. All of that stuff that's in the bag that we might not even be aware of, that's repressed and suppressed, that is the shadow. That is what shows up in dreams. That is what we project on other people. So, quick review: whatever I can't handle as part of my persona, that one way I can deal with that is that if it's actually coming from me and it's in my bag, I can subconsciously project that out so I get some distance from it. I still have a relationship to it, but it's out there, and thus it's less intense since it's out there. Um, Another parable, this is a popular story. See if you can recognize this story. So, there was once a garden, and in that garden, there was a man and a woman. And in this garden, this man and woman were want for nothing. There was unity, there was wholeness, it was paradise. Um, but then a snake appeared, and this snake had a bright idea that, ooh, there's a juicy apple. And these two, the man and the bit of this apple. And what was that apple's name? That apple was the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil. In other words, the split between the persona and the shadow. Before that knowledge, there was unity. But as soon as there's a paradigm of this is the good and this is the evil, then the persona and the shadow split into two. Um, I'm just thinking about the domestication process that all we modern humans go through. And this is a psychoanalytic view from Freud. He wrote an interesting book called Civilization and Its Discontents. Um, and his model that I agree with is that society or civilization gives us human beings safety and structure, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is neuroses, because for civilization to work, we have to split ourselves into, what is acceptable by civilization and what is unacceptable by civilization. And all of that unacceptable stuff we put in that bag. And putting stuff in that bag comes at a cost. And the cost of that is it takes a lot of energy to put it back there. And that the cost of suppression is neuroses. So if you suppress enough for long enough, that's going to show up as depression, anxiety, phobias, neuroses, all of that stuff in the DSM-5. That from this model is coming from suppression, coming from putting stuff in the bag. The benefit of that is that we live in a somewhat, in the West here in America, a somewhat safe, non-violent compared to our origins environment, because all of our aggression and sexuality is suppressed. Not all of it comes out through the cracks, but that's the main thing that is back there in the bag, the main thing that the finger wagging is about. If you look at, for example, public education in America. In America, public education is based on a Prussian military academy model. So back in the early industrialization of America, these aristocratic industrialists wanted docile, conformist factory workers to fill up, the Industrial Revolution. They wanted people that did what they were told, that didn't think for themselves, that were pretty much worker drones. And so they brought over this really good model for that from Prussia, a military academy model. And then that's American public schools. So that's where you get the rows of desks and the bells, like the factory bells, and then the authoritarian teacher wagging their finger at you, and then sitting in the desk and just nodding and trying to absorb information. That whole system is designed to cut things off, put them in the bag, and have a nice good boy or good girl there that is just a very narrow bandwidth of what is possible in humanity. That is what that model is designed to do. And people that can do that, they are rewarded. They are rewarded heavily for being good boys and girls or gender nonconformists. Um, they are given status, they are given degrees, they are given wealth, they are given mating opportunities, they are given high up on the hierarchy, yachts, um, nice houses. But that comes at a cost because, what do you get for being a good boy or a good girl? You also get a shit ton of neuroses. You get maybe a lot of prescription drugs to keep all that stuff in the bag, to keep it from overwhelming the persona with a tidal wave of shadow. That's another benefit you get from being a good boy or a good girl. Oh, geez. So there's a study with rats, and so if you get two juvenile rats together, all they want to do is wrestle each other, and they'll play like they'll pin each other, and then they'll wrestle. It's called rough and tumble play in psychology. But you can give these rats ADD medication, and that ADD medication will inhibit the rats from playing, from doing this rough and tumble play. But interestingly enough, if you stop rats from doing rough and tumble play, later on in their lives, they will develop symptoms of ADD and anxiety and depression. So you can stop rats from playing, but it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of neuroses. So my part of my current living situation is that I'm helping my friends with child care duties, and I'm one of my gigs is a chauffeur to 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I take them to school and back like a soccer dad, and in the minivan, complete with the minivan, and I drop this, you know, 5-year-old off at a very progressive preschool, a Montessori school. And me and this 5-year-old, we've developed quite the, friendship. And I know this research, and these two, these 5 and 8-year-old, they figured out that I will rough and tumble play with them. So they're getting into kickboxing now. So, we're training in kickboxing, and I'm dodging, and then we do the little wrestling, and that's all they really want to do is do this rough and tumble play. And in that rough and tumble play, this it's got some amazing benefits. For one, they know how to keep that play within a threshold of what's acceptable. Because if they go beyond a threshold, I'm like, I'm not gonna no, I'm not gonna play with you if you take it above this threshold. So they know that, oh, if I'm going to engage in play, I got to keep the arousal within this bandwidth. And then they learn about power and their bodies and how to play with another person. And it's got a lot of benefit. But this little side effect has kicked in where I drop a 5-year-old off at preschool, and then word has spread within the preschool that, hey, this guy will rough and tumble play with you. So I go into this Montessori school, and I'm mobbed by preschoolers that all want to kickbox and wrestle. And I'll do it. Because I know the research. I'm not gonna be a part of that suppression. And then the teachers are starting to like crack the whip. So I'm in there. I get mobbed by preschoolers. I'm wrestling. I'm kickboxing, and in a tasteful way. And then a couple preschool teachers just come in like little, I don't know, the voice of the tyranny, and they're like, "We don't do that. We don't hit. We don't do that." And in that very nauseating progressive language, "We don't do that." And you see the kids, they're all excited, and they go, "Oh," and it just kind of breaks my heart because I know what that does. They will be coming to my office in hopefully only 15 years with anxiety, with depression, with ADHD, because they're being domesticated. They're being suppressed in the name of virtue. Um, and I get it. Like if you're trying to herd cats of many preschoolers, it would probably be more challenging if they're practicing kickboxing on each other. But that suppression comes at a cost. There's a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. If only it were so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessarily only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? So this is the shadow. What is less known about the shadow is that society, public education, parents, religion does not just suppress kickboxing and sexual impulses, it also suppresses greatness and potential and beauty because society, family systems love conformity. Anything outside of that is subtly or not so subtly shamed. So part of this model of the shadow is that everything that a human being has done or can do is within me. That means Auschwitz guards, that's in me, and so is the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, um, Jesus, the Buddha, if they in fact were real humans, who knows? But every good thing a human being is capable of, and every evil thing a human being is capable of, is within me. It's not outside of me. That's not separate from my potentiality. So, Jung had a famous line that I find terrifying and true. The line was the greatest burden the child faces is the unlived life of their parents. The greatest burden the child faces is the unlived life of their parents. Wow. So I would add to that that the child faces the burden of the unlived life or the unlived potential, not only of their parents, but of the society, the culture at large. So maybe a little story about this. Okay, so self disclosure. I grew up in a military blue collar town in the 80s. And in this military blue collar town, it was very patriarchal and very firm gender roles. And part of being a boy and a man in that culture was that, very typical male upbringing. Emotions, those were off limits. Um, all of those juicy feminine things like intuition, magic, um, reverie, mystery, unity, anything right brain, that was considered girly. And logic and power, dominance, these were all celebrated masculine virtues. So, in some way, when I came into young adulthood, my 20s, a lot of what was in my bag, be it stretching around the block and down the corner, was my own feminine traits. I think by nature I'm rather feminine, but my conditioning was very, it was the man box. So, anyways, I get to my 20s and I'm already manifesting lots of neuroses. Uh, so much neuroses that I found my way to a 3-month Buddhist silent retreat. So, most people who end up at these retreats are highly motivated because who in their right mind would take a vow of silence to do absolutely nothing, wake up at 4 o'clock in the goddamn morning every day for 3 months unless you were highly motivated to heal? So I was at this retreat at IMS 3-month retreat. I was 24 at the time and took the vow of silence and celibacy. So that makes for an interesting time. So take a vow of celibacy at 24 with a lot of testosterone, which includes no masturbation, and then see what happens. And so, anyways, 3-month retreat, 100 people plus 6 teachers and assistants, and probably 70% women, 30% men. And there's this very common thing that happens at these retreats. It's called the Vipassana romance. And it's this extremely fertile ground for projection. It's like it was designed for projection. Um, so you're in silence, you're not talking to each other, but you're sharing a meditation hall and then you're sharing a dining hall. And there's like eye contact is discouraged as well. So you don't really know these people at all. There's no real interaction, but you're sharing the space, this very intimate space in a kind of an intense container, meditating 12 hours a day in a Buddhist container. And you get to project all you like on these people. And the projections really have two polarities to them, which I talked about in the last talk. One is the positive projection, and the other is the negative projection. So the flip side to the Vipassana romance is the Vipassana vendetta, where you project all of the things you don't like about yourself onto this person. You don't like the way they move, you don't like the way they talk, you don't like the way they act, you don't like the way they chew their food, and you get to watch these projections all day long and hopefully integrate them, learn something about yourself. So, anyways, most of my bag was full of my own feminine dissociated traits. And I remember falling in love, like deep, deep, deep in love about 2 weeks into this retreat. I was there for 3 months. And there was a particular yogi there, a girl, and oh my God, she was like a goddess, just the way she floated through the meditation hall, the way she piled food onto her plate, and just her clothes were so elegant. Oh man, just talking about her, I almost feel that same feeling. And I remember she was like across the hall, and I remember like when she would walk by, I would pretend like, oh, I'm very Buddhist, I'm very still, I'm very calm, hoping she would look at me. And this might be a little politically incorrect, but anyways, on Vipassana retreats, a 6 in the world is a 12 on a Vipassana retreat. They gain 6 points on a Vipassana retreat. So, anyways, this infatuation went on for 6 weeks. And, all of the things I was projecting on her were the things that I had disowned within myself, my own capacity for grace, for elegance, for aesthetic quality. On this retreat, I was like dressed in sweatpants, and I would just pile on food onto my plate and eat it like a savage. Meanwhile, she's very like elegant and tasteful. So this infatuation went on for 6 weeks, and then at the 6 week mark of the retreat, you could either do the first half or the second half or both, and I was doing both. And she left, and I was heartbroken. I felt like I had lost a piece of my own soul, and I was heartbroken for about a week until I started noticing this other girl who had been there the whole time. And it was wild because the projection just moved over to her. And she'd been there the whole time, and I had barely noticed her, but the projection just went zoop. And then I started obsessing about her for the next 6 weeks. And hopefully during that time, I started integrating all of the things about that, because it wasn't about them. They were just an unconscious a blank slate to project upon my own qualities of femininity. This is what Jung called the anima. So the part of oneself that holds the mystery, the beauty, the goodness, the joy. That's an inside job. But if I were to truly own that, I would have to really maybe change my life, shake up my ego structure, so it's easier to put it outside. There's a very interesting teaching from Zen Buddhism, and the teaching is, if you see the Buddha in the road, kill him. If you see the Buddha in the road, kill him. So what does that mean? In other words, if you see the Buddha outside of yourself, kill that projection. And this is the process, what's called in Jungian psychology, of withdrawing the projection. So keeping things outside of myself, that maintains the status quo of my persona and shadow. Moving the projection from the shadow back home, that shakes up the system. That is what actually transforms. So Nietzsche famously said that God is dead. And what he was referring to was that as the secularization of in Western civilization happened, the structures that cohered the common myth of the culture crumbled. And in that void, human beings need an organizing myth. And interestingly enough, Nietzsche predicted that human beings would fill that void with ideologies, and he was correct. So Nietzsche, interestingly enough, predicted the atrocities of the 20th century that in the absence of God, human beings will come up with other things to worship. So they came up with communism and they came up with fascism. Another thing Nietzsche said is that every human being has a God shaped hole in their heart. So, as human beings, we have a religious impulse. We have this, one way to think of that religious impulse is the impulse towards unity, the impulse to get back to the garden. Maybe because we all remember deep down on an implicit level what it was like to not be split, what it was like before we bit that apple of good and evil, before we were domesticated and split into less than a whole self. So we have that impulse for God, whatever you want to call that. And in modern times, a Jungian analyst, Robert Johnson, proposes, and I tend to agree with him, that the most common way modern Western humans fulfill that thirst for God is through romance, through the romantic impulse. Uh, in the absence of um, a Christian God, we now go to the altar of romantic love to do our worship, um, to fulfill that need, that thirst. So it's not like we say to our romantic interests, because it's not conscious, we don't say to them, hey, I'm projecting God on you, but we say we're in love. Um, so we expect the other person to be our redeemer, to somehow bring meaning to our lives, to make all of the suffering that we go through worthwhile. If you listen and read between the lines of most pop songs and Hollywood movies, that is kind of an implicit message that this romantic pursuit is somehow elevated to the realm of deification. And in getting back to that line I said earlier, if you see the Buddha in the road, kill him. So this is the very unsexy part of withdrawing projections. And I'm reminded of an amazing movie, The Matrix, the first one. The other two were crap, the sequels, but the first one was quite the banger. And if you remember, Neo meets Morpheus. Morpheus is the god of sleep and dreams. And Morpheus offers Neo an option. He can either take the blue pill and stay in the fantasy, or he can take the red pill and see how deep that rabbit hole goes. And Morpheus had an interesting line. He said, all I am offering is the truth, nothing more. All I am offering is the truth, nothing more. So Neo takes the red pill and finds himself in the desert of the real, which is an interesting archetypal motif. So the desert of the real. He finds himself in a barren landscape, post-apocalyptic. Uh, this is the realm of disenchantment, which is a major piece of Buddhist practice as well. This is the kind of bardo place of withdrawing the projection. So when we're projecting our magic externally, the world might be a magical place. We might project that, oh, this romantic interest, if I could just win their love, then my life will be complete. And if I can just land this job, that will bring meaning and status to my life. And then I'll get that yacht. and then all of my life will be complete even more, and I don't know, everyone will love me, and I will return to this Garden of Eden state. And one way to think of the midlife crisis is that those projections are withdrawing, meaning by the time people reach midlife, they usually have come to the understanding that their youthful idealism, that all of these things they're projecting externally, maybe they've even gotten some success in life. Maybe they've had, well, by the time you're in midlife, you've had a string of failed relationships, most likely. The job you so coveted, or that degree that you chased after, you realize that that's not doing it. That is not the Garden of Eden. That those all of the gods that you projected on status and career and relationship, those are false idols. And so those projections start withdrawing, and one finds themselves in the desert of the real, where it's like, oh shit, no one's driving the bus. All of these authority figures that I was projecting God on, they just turns out they're normal human beings. Um, those goddesses that I was projecting on, they, uh, there's something about romantic relationships that if you spend enough time with a person, those projections just have a natural way of crumbling. There's a I think this is from Hamlet, but there's this romantic kind of naive poet, and he's saying, he's lamenting to the gods, no wonder I lost my wits. Oh Celia, oh Celia, oh Celia shits. So, in other words, he was projecting on Celia. She's the goddess. And then he finds out she shits just like everyone else. And no matter how sexy your partner might appear at first, spend enough time with them and you're gonna get annoyed. You're gonna hear them fart and shit, and just like every other human. So, no human being is up to holding that projection of God. And just spend enough time with them, and that God projection will crumble and it will withdraw. So that's the bad news, that the world is in some way without projection, the desert of the real. The good news is that all of that godlike impulse, all of that beauty, all of that magic, all of that wonder, that was coming from you and projected outward. And that's actually in your own bag back there. And that is the work. Well, Jung famously said that life starts at 40. Before that, you're just doing research. And what he was saying, that it might be a little different in modern times. In modern times, younger people are going to therapy earlier and they're doing psychedelic drugs, which which tends to expedite this process. But what Jung was saying, that before 40, you're just caught up in the dream. You're blue pilled, bro. You're just running after status and romantic encounters and experiences. And it takes till about 40 before those projections start to crumble all on their own. And that's when the real work of life begins. The real work of taking things out of the bag and integrating them into a cohesive wholeness. That is the work of age 40 till death. And it's really fun. I recommend it. Um, yeah, Joseph Campbell talked about the midlife crisis too. He said, the midlife crisis is climbing the ladder only to realize that the ladder is against the wrong wall. And he also said, we must let go of the life we had planned so as to accept the one that is waiting for us. So one can kind of look to other cultures that don't mix that romantic impulse with the impulse for the divine and God, that thirst for unity. So more like Buddhist places in Asia and Hindu places in India, people aren't doing that mixy matchy thing so much. They go to the temple or the monastery for their God fix, and they go to uh, arranged marriages or romantic love with maybe a more level head. The Western mind tends to mix the two and to lots of problems because, no, like I said, no one can handle the God projection. And one of these other benefits of withdrawing that enchantment is that only when that projection drops is a real relationship possible. Because before that, you're just using the person as a canvas to project your own godlike impulses and thirst upon. You're kind of using them as a Rorschach test. It's only when that projection drops that you can actually have a relationship with another human being. So that is my unsexy take on things for this Saturday morning. And thanks for listening. And if you made it this far, please like and subscribe. And I like to dialogue. I'm curious what this brought up for you, this talk. BrentMortonMFT.com for more of this. And if you found this talk meaningful, please share it with your friends. Word of mouth referrals is probably the only way this channel will grow. And even if it doesn't grow, whatever, this is fun. And thanks for listening and take care.